Hey trainers, JPR here. Hisuian Pokemon are ancient forms that are thought to have gone extinct. Or are they? See, while the games tell us that- Ow, my knees are- okay, my knees can't do this. I need my chair. See, while the game tells us the Hisuian Pokemon have been long gone, this is contradicted by a lot of material. So in this video, I'm going to break down the real fates of every single Hisuian Pokemon, why they actually went extinct, and ultimately answer the question, what happened to every Hisuian Pokemon? Now, some of these are quite easy to answer, the easiest of which being Ursaluna. As parent implies that the Blood Moon Ursaluna found in Kitakami is the last surviving member of its species, as it apparently crossed the sea long ago and developed new powers as it attempted to survive in its new environment. Now, the sea may be a bit of an exaggeration, as many old tales tend to be, like, dude, there's no way your grandpa actually walked uphill both ways on the way to school. That's, like, factually impossible unless he was also going downhill both ways. But yeah, by the sea, the game is likely referring to this tiny channel that separates the real-world Hokkaido, or in-game Sinnoh, from the place Kitakami draws inspiration from, the Aomori Prefecture in northern Honshu Island. This means Kitakami is a small territory that separates the Sinnoh region from the Kanto region. Assuming that the Pokemon world is laid out exactly like the real world is, which, given the descriptions we have about its geography, we can assume is mostly true. So right off the bat, I have to give Ursaluna a rating of endangered, but not truly extinct. With that being said, what happened to the original form of Ursaluna? It's nowhere to be found in the modern Pokemon world, and Ursaluna's Pokedex entry from Legends Arceus actually sheds some light as to why. As Professor Levinton writes, I believe it was Hisui's swampy terrain that gave Ursaluna its burly physique and newfound capacity to manipulate peat at will. So with the terrain of the Sinnoh region changing over time, and likely the mineral composition itself, this is likely what caused the peat block item to go missing and prevent Ursaring from evolving into Ursaluna. The harsh climate of Sinnoh likely wiped out the remaining population of Ursaluna, who are weak to ice, unable to replenish themselves after losing the peat block, leaving only the Blood Moon variant who is smart enough to move south, just like your average Yankee moves to Florida after retiring. For another easy answer we can pluck straight from the Pokedex, we also have Weirdeer. In Pokemon Scarlet, Stantler's Pokedex entry states that it used to live in much more harsh climates and it developed psychic powers as a result. But as the Stantler population migrated south and the conditions became much more survivable, Stantler no longer needed to tap into its psychic powers as much, and so the Psy-Shield Bash technique and its evolution were both lost. Levinton also claims that the people of Hisui use Weirdeer's fur for warmth, which seemingly implies that the remaining members of the species were likely hunted to extinction. And a not-so-fun fact, you can actually breed Psy-Shield Bash onto a modern-day Stantler in Gen 9 using a Weirdeer as the parent, but even after learning the move, Stantler can never evolve into Weirdeer, which is oddly frustrating. But also means that we have our first confirmed extinct Pokemon of the video. As for our next Pokemon, Kleavor, the answer is a little more abstract. Scarlet and Violet actually revealed that Scyther can still naturally evolve into Kleavor. As the Scarlet Pokedex states, parts of its body turn to stone when it evolved thanks to an extremely rare ore found in volcanic areas. Which means the Black Augurite is still out there. Which, of course, is evidenced by its existence in the terrarium, which is the only known place where wild Kleavor still appear. However, since the Black Augurite appears to be a protected and non-harvestable mineral in the modern day, a trainer Scyther cannot evolve into a Kleavor. Only wild ones who naturally come into contact with the item. Yeah, I know, it's stupid. I didn't design the game, I'm just giving an explanation. Okay, so with that knowledge, we can confidently mark Kleavor as endangered, but we still lack the real reason why its population has dwindled. Could it be the Black Augurite just naturally disappearing over time like the peat block did? Most likely, that is one cause, yes. But also consider competition among species. Just like in the real world, we know that Darwinian-style evolution exists in the Pokemon world. Survival of the fittest, if you will. We actually know this thanks to another Hisuian Pokemon who will go ahead and knock off the list here, Sneasler. I'm just gonna rip the band-aid off right now. Unless a future Pokemon game retcons this, Sneasler is 100% extinct. We know this for a fact because the Weavile that developed from the same group were simply much more skilled hunters. Dang, Sneasler, that guy is 4 times weak to fighting and you still went extinct. That is some weak stuff right there. The Pokedex for Sneasler states that it preferred solitude and would never form packs. Whereas Levinton notes how much more intellectually developed and more effective at hunting in packs that Weavile are. It's likely that once the Sneasel from Johto migrated north to Sinnoh, they simply outcompeted the existing population of Hisuian Sneasel and Sneasler, and then later evolved into Weavile. So with that brief intermission out of the way, we return to Kleavor, who likely suffered from the exact same problem. Once small groups of Scyther discovered metal and began evolving into Caesar, their type advantage likely allowed them to beat Kleavor head-to-head in battle and establish themselves as the dominant species. I know Sneasler's typing kinda contradicts this theory compared to Weavile, but bear in mind that each Sneasler probably had to fight like 5 Weavile at once. The odds were stacked against it. And the odds will be stacked against you seeing my next video if you're not subscribed to the channel. Ooh, what a clean transition. That was actually really good. But yeah, seriously, it's the best way to not miss a video, so make sure you're subscribed. It's free. Our next Pokemon on the list are Hisuian Basculin and Basculegion, who surprisingly enough are our first members of the survived category. These guys are actually still thriving just fine in Kitakami and presumably other remote areas of the Pokemon world. They have a much gentler disposition compared to the red and blue striped Basculins. So one would think that they would just get outcompeted for food like Sneasler did, but as the Pokedex points out, the white-striped Basculin actually occupies frigid waters, in completely different regions than normal Basculin, so they actually don't compete against each other at all. They just let the Reds and the Blues beef it out in New York while they mind their own business. Now, that still doesn't explain why they left the Sinnoh region behind, but hey, it's a start. Also, the Pokedex never refers to them as Hisuian Basculin, just white-striped Basculin, implying that they can be found anywhere in the world, not just Hisui. This would also mean that Basculegion is also confirmed to have survived, which is funny because it literally exists from other Basculin dying. Surprisingly, Basculin's other waterbound friend Quillfish was equally as lucky. While Hisuian Quillfish only spawns in the terrarium in Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, a presumably protected area, the Pokedex claims that populations of this Pokemon still exist in remote polar biomes across the world. Legends Arceus' dex even claims that both forms of Quillfish have existed at the same time throughout history. So both Quillfish and Overquill get the rating of survived. They're just extremely rare since we don't have any Pokemon regions that are actually in polar areas. Like, yeah, Sinnoh is cold, but so is Maine. It's not polar. Climate change and the warming seas is likely what causes Pokemon to migrate to the poles, far away from the modern Sinnoh region. Next we have Hisuian Growlithe and Arcanine, who we know still exist as Perrin owns a Hisuian Growlithe in the Gen 9 DLC, but there are none in the wild that we know of, so right away these two can be labeled as endangered. In Legends Arceus, Laventon theorizes that volcanic activity in the area led to these Pokemon developing rock-like fur. While Stark Mountain still exists in modern-day Sinnoh, it definitely doesn't seem as volcanically active as Firespit Mountain was in Legends Arceus. So perhaps the volcano dying down is why they lost their rock typing over time. Though this doesn't explain why the Growlithe and Alola, which is volcanically active, aren't rock type. I know the actual answer is that they just hadn't made that form yet. But for a logical explanation, I'm just going to go with survival of the fittest again. The Growlithe and Hisui live in a coastal area filled with water, and of course water-type Pokemon, so their habitat was naturally going to be very aggressive towards the fire-rock-type members of the species. I mean, the original Noble Arcanine literally dies trying to swim, so that reaffirms my theory pretty well, I'd say. So honestly, I think the rock typing just got lost over time because being a pure fire type was more beneficial for the survival of the species. Next up, we probably have the most confusing Pokemon yet, Hisuian Zorua and Zoroark. Like Quillfish, the Hisuian and modern-day variants of this Pokemon presumably existed at the same time, even though we didn't see Univin Zoroark in Legends Arceus, as the Pokedex literally calls them departed souls that came back to life. Whether they were killed by the harsh climate or people who feared Pokemon is left up to interpretation, though given that it's the spiteful fox Pokemon in the Pokedex, and how Zoroark literally kills a guy in his reveal trailer, I'm going to assume it's the latter. So I can only assume that the reason why Hisuian Zorua and Zoroark don't exist anymore is because people eventually stopped being scared of Pokemon and killing them, and so their vengeful spirits no longer have to come back and be reborn. So Hisuian Zoroark is officially extinct. Which is weird because that just means that there are now more Zorua and Zoroark being left alive. It sounds backwards, but I'm assuming that's how that works. Next up we have Hisuian Voltorb and Electrode. These two also seem pretty easy, they likely just adapted to blend into their environment. As Apricorn-based Pokeballs were phased out and replaced with mechanical Pokeballs, the Voltorb and Electrode that adapted to look like modern-day Pokeballs probably escaped being captured more often, and as a result became more numerous than their Hisuian counterparts. We also see in modern-day Sinnoh that the snowy part of Mount Coronet is extended much further down the mountain, presumably wiping out the grass-type Voltorbs that used to live there. However, Hisuian Voltorb is not fully extinct, as they very rarely appear in mass outbreaks in the Paldea region. I know it was part of an online event, maybe you wouldn't exactly count that as canon, but hey, you know what? Mythical Pokemon events are also happening online, and they're canon, so why not? So, the Hisuian population, I would say, is maybe endangered, but you could also argue they just survived by adapting into the Voltorbs we have today. I don't know. I'll throw in Hisuian Lilligant here as well, because it too was likely just wiped out by the harsh climate of the Sinnoh region. As Hisuian Lilligant developed its strong legs to live in mountainous climates, but maybe over time the climate just proved to be too much for it. This one is most likely extinct. Speaking of Gen 5 Pokemon, Braviary is a really fascinating one, because the reason for it changing types is never explicitly stated or implied by anything in the game. One theory I found online is that Hisuian Braviary likely preyed on Hisuian Sneasel since they were found in the same general area of Hisui, and the psychic typing actually gave it a really good advantage against the poison and fighting type Hisuian Sneasels. But once the Johtonian population invaded, suddenly they had the type advantage on Braviary being dark and ice. And they basically wiped out all the Hisuian Braviary at the same time they wiped out all the Sneasler. The Univin Braviary were probably just living in other regions at the time and were already normal types, so not much else changed there. Good old American isolationism is how they survived. Anyway, that is by far the most solid theory I found, and I could not personally come up with a better one, and Hisuian Braviary still doesn't appear anywhere in the modern games, so yeah, he dead. Extinct. Hisuian Sliggoo and Goodra are also pretty easy to solve, as Laventon theorizes that the iron in Hisui's water likely caused a reaction with Gumi's mucus to form the shells that its evolved forms have in this region. So, similar to Ursaluna, as the minerals in the water changed over time, these two gradually lost the iron in their bodies, and their corrosive insides just burned the shells off. And just like Ursaluna, the modern-day Gumi family appears to have migrated slightly south to Kitakami. But unlike Ursaluna, obviously Sliggoo and Goodra are species that still exist, so they're more like Voltorb. I would say they just adapted to survive. Next up is Avalugg, and I want to just say global warming because, like, it's an iceberg. It just seems like the obvious solution. But then, why would it lose its rock typing and stay ice? Also, modern day Sinnoh is still cold. We just talked about how Mount Coronet is seemingly colder than it was in the past. So, what happened to the Bergamite and Avalugg? I don't know, maybe they all just went to sea and drifted to other regions and the seawater dissolved the rock in their bodies and they became pure ice types? That's all I got, sorry man, I hate this Pokemon. I guess they adapted to survive? That's my rating. Likewise, we don't have much of an explanation for the Hisuian starters all going extinct. Although, my guess is simply that they were only ever kept in captivity, they don't natively appear anywhere in Hisui outside of space-time distortions, so odds are the Hisuian populations of these Pokemon probably just never really developed in the wild, and the small numbers of them that existed were only ever owned by a handful of trainers, likely extinct now. And as for the final Pokemon from the Hisui region, arguably the most mysterious of them all, Enamorus. Honestly, I would love to do a full video on Enamorus one day like I did recently with Heatran, but the problem is, we still know very little about this Pokemon. And I have seen theories ranging from it only appears in the springtime to it's part of an alternate timeline where fairy types exist and that's why it never showed up in Unova. Honestly, my solution is a very simple one. I think it's probably just roaming the world like the other genies do. They all have a habit of being travelers. My prediction is that Enamorus will end up becoming one of those more common recurring legendary Pokemon like the Eon Duo or the legendary Beasts. I firmly believe it's still out there, it's just so new that they decided to not show it off in Scarlet and Violet. So this is the only Pokemon in this video that I'm giving the rating of missing. I guess we'll just have to wait and see. So those are what I believe to be the fates of every single Hisuian Pokemon. Do you have any theories of your own? Be sure to leave them in the comment section down below. But don't forget to leave a like on this video if you enjoyed, subscribe for more videos just like this one, and I'll see you guys next time.